Hello everyone, welcome back. It is a new day, a new sleigh, and a new video where I have something to say. And today I have a lot of things to say about this next book. Today we are reviewing The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. This is actually the cover, I believe, from 1992. I don't know when it's from, but it was a part of the Oprah book club. Apparently they were really close, like they were besties. So I'm going to preface this video by saying that I'm going to take a little bit more of a serious approach to this one. So no fancy edits, nothing like that, just because I feel that the subject material and the things that I'm covering in this video are a little bit more serious and things that I really want to give a lot of care and depth when I'm talking about them. Before I get anywhere near touching the subject material of this book, I will also preface by saying that this book covers a lot of very heavy subject material. So if you're sensitive to certain topics, including sexual assault, childhood sexual assault, and things of that nature, then I would suggest clicking off of this video. And I wouldn't say don't read the book, because I think this book is worth going a little bit out of our comfort zones to actually sit down and read. But I would definitely encourage to take as many breaks as you need. Click away if you need to, set the book down, really think about it. I want everyone to know, if anyone decides to pick up this book, that it's not meant to make you feel comfortable. It's meant to push us outside of our comfort zones and really force us to look at these themes and topics that Toni Morrison is trying to cover in this book. So I wouldn't suggest that you never read this book, but if there's certain measures that you need to take to make sure that you feel comfortable and you feel safe while reading it, please feel free to do so. So with that being said, let's get into The Bluest Eye. I also have a script that I prepared. It's about 5,000 words long. I really wrote like a college level essay. I just had so many thoughts and I wanted to make sure that I was communicating them to the best of my ability. So if you see me looking down, that's what I'm referring to. The Bluest Eye is the first novel published by renowned author Toni Morrison. Now, she's mainly known for her magnum opus of Beloved, but The Bluest Eye is another incredibly influential and insightful piece of literature. It's also a very heavily banned book in the US. At the time of its release, it did not garner a lot of attention as Beloved and some of her other works would in the future, but now as time has passed, a lot of people have come back to this book and they look on it very fondly. The Bluest Eye follows the story of one Piccola Breedlove, a little black girl who wants nothing more than to have blue eyes. The story follows Piccola's life as we go through the cycle of 1 year, starting at autumn, going to winter, spring, and then finally ending at the summer. The story starts when she's placed with the McTeer family, specifically the other main characters, Frida and Claudia, up until the end of the story, when she's cast out by society after they find out she is pregnant with her father's baby. This story is one of inevitability, where at every turn, the people in Piccola's life and the people that she meets consistently fail her. If you're going to read this book, I would heavily suggest that before you even crack it open, to look at the author's note that is in the back of the book. I'm definitely not someone that can brag and say that I always do this or I always read the acknowledgments or things of that nature, but for understanding this book, I think it's crucial to hear from Toni Morrison herself what she was thinking when she was going into writing this story. In this author's note, at least in my version, Toni Morrison discusses The Bluest Eye and how it's meant to examine Eurocentric beauty standards and the harmful effects they have on Black women. And most importantly, how these standards are perpetuated both consciously and unconsciously, and by what communities. So now comes the more in-depth portion of the video where I will go through each of the seasons and what goes on. I'm not going to go necessarily very in-depth into every story beat. I think for the purpose of this video, I want to do more of an analysis because I think there's just so much to talk about. For the purpose of this video, I'll be covering a little bit more of the heavier story beats that come up in this story and kind of giving my commentary, but I will have greater things to say at the end of the video. Hello, it's been a while since I've done one of these. I know I've been kind of slacking, but I have a new organization that I'm bringing to you today, and I thought it was only right, only just that this be in The Bluest Eye. So this next organization that I will be highlighting is Black Women for Wellness. Now, this organization, in their mission statement, they say they're committed to the health and well-being of Black women and girls through health education, empowerment, and advocacy. So a lot of what they do is helping to expand healthcare, advocating for Black women and Black girls, and of course they build political advocacy. They also provide programs including nutrition education, chronic disease prevention, reproductive justice, environmental justice, sexual health education, civic engagement, and policy work. And right now, and very importantly, they're working with partners, allies, and most notably the state of California to help provide a safe space for people in need of abortion services. Again, as I'll get into more later in this video, the health and wellness of Black girls girls and Black women is incredibly, incredibly necessary in today's society. There's too many disparities, especially in healthcare, so it's incredibly important that we uplift and support organizations like this one. So, as always, I will be making a donation. Please feel free to make one yourself. If not, follow their social medias, stay up to date, subscribe to their newsletters, just get involved, pay attention, create some buzz. And of course, support in whatever ways you can. But this is just an organization that I wanted to highlight specifically for this video, so please check them out. Back to your normally scheduled video. Consistently throughout the story, Piccola is described as completely and objectively ugly. She has no other distinguishing features that are mentioned that would otherwise explain why she's ugly, other than hearing about how people talk about her. And this is done on purpose because I'll go into a little bit later, but the ugliness that they describe is both what is perceived ugliness versus real ugliness, internal ugliness versus external ugliness. So whether or not you can actually describe Piccola as ugly or if she's really ugly, it's not important for this story. When the novel opens, Piccola has been placed with the MacTeers, aka Claudia and Frida's family, after her father set their house on fire. One of the first story beats that we see is Piccola drinks 3 quarts of milk. Claudia's mother comments on how Piccola drank 3 quarts of milk, although she doesn't explicitly say that she knows it was her, but we get through context in the story that the reason Piccola wanted to drink the milk so badly was because they had a Shirley Temple mug that she would always drink it out of, and she really liked to look at it, so that's why she was drinking so much milk. Their mother goes on a long rant about how she's forced to take care of Piccola and feed her when even her father hasn't come to check on her and make sure she's still alive. Again, although she doesn't say Piccola's name, it communicates to all the girls, including her, that Piccola is a burden to their family. It's just another one small way that Piccola is getting isolated and singled out for simply existing. Claudia and Frida don't come to her defense, even though they know the only reason she did it was because she wanted to see the mug. It communicates to us as the reader that although this is a very childish and simple want, it's juxtaposed with their mother viewing it as an act of greed. And it's also when we're talking about this mug that we get an inside look into Claudia's mind specifically. She's the younger of the 3 girls. In the story, she's about 9 years old. So at this point, she's still too young to feel insecure about herself. She hasn't quite been primed with the Eurocentric beauty standards that the other older girls will eventually fall into. She talks specifically about how she was gifted a white baby doll for Christmas and destroyed it in a way to try and understand what made it so desirable. She contrasts the admiration of a lot of the older generation of Black women as well as some of the other girls that they go to school with and their admiration of white beauty. In this same moment as the milk incident, Piccola gets her period for the very first time. She is met with a rare kindness and the girls help her put on a cotton pad. One of the neighborhood girls named Rosemary sees them and calls to Mrs. MacTeer saying that they're playing nasty. Without hesitation, their mother immediately comes out, grabs a switch, and hits Frida with it. She goes to hit Piccola, but when she turns her around, she sees the napkin fall and immediately understands what is going on. She consoles Frida after she hits her and tells Rosemary to go home. In this instance, it's important to note both their mother's initial punishment and her guilt afterwards. Mrs. MacTeer immediately believes the little girl because she's white, despite her own daughters trying to tell her that they weren't playing nasty and they were only trying to help Piccola. She's quick to anger and hits Frida and only stops when she realizes she's wrong. She comforts Frida and consoles her, which, although is not explicit, conveys the guilt that she feels. There's also a point earlier on in the story where Claudia is sick and her mother is trying to take care of her and shows a lot of love. Claudia describes that getting sick is almost like a punishment in their family, almost as if they're punished for getting sick because then they can't do work around the house. But despite saying this, we see her mother take care of her and we see the love in all of her actions, that despite the supposed burden of her, in this instance, she throws up on her bed, her mother still comes in the middle of the night to make sure she still has a blanket and still conveys a lot of love. And this is meant to completely oppose Piccola's mother, where even if some of the things that Mrs. MacTeer does don't necessarily convey it, she still holds so much love for her children, and she actively tries to be kind. Now, in this autumn section of the book, we also get a description of the Breedloves as a family unit. So we have Pauline and Charlie Breedlove, mother and father, who are constantly fighting. And we have their 2 children, Sammy Breedlove and Piccola Breedlove. Sammy is their oldest son, who is constantly running away from home, and Piccola is their ugly daughter. We see how living in this household is deeply affecting Piccola and how she believes that all her problems would be solved if only she had blue eyes. This is the first time in the book we get someone mention wanting blue eyes, and Piccola believes that if she had them, her parents wouldn't fight because They mustn't do bad things in front of someone with such pretty eyes. I will read the excerpt from the novel because I think it's very important. She says, "It had occurred to Piccola some time ago that if her eyes, those eyes that held the pictures and knew the sights, if those eyes of hers were different, that is to say beautiful, she herself would be different. Her teeth were good, and at least her nose was not big and flat, like some of those who were thought so cute. If she looked different, beautiful, maybe Charlie would be different, and Mrs. Breedlove too. Maybe they'd say, 'Why, look at pretty-eyed Piccola. We mustn't do bad things in front of those pretty eyes.'" There's an implication that their white counterparts do not face the same problems as Piccola and her family because of their whiteness. White children live lives like Dick and Jane or Shirley Temple, and their parents don't fight to maintain balance. So this is the first seed that is planted in Piccola's mind that there is something that she is missing. It's important to understand again that the ugliness that is referred in this book does not explicitly mean physical beauty and can also be applied to internal ugliness. Piccola has a perceived ugliness that she internalizes based on how other characters in the book interact with her. And no doubt about it, her ugliness is tied because she has specifically black features that other people in this book deem as ugly. The scale of what is ugly versus beautiful is completely tied to the proximity to whiteness. In this specific section, Piccola also goes to the store to buy some candy. The shop owner, notably a white immigrant, does not even want to touch Piccola's hand to get the money. I note that he's an immigrant because I think it speaks to a larger idea to the social hierarchy that exists within our society. And unfortunately, in this society, Black women are always perceived to be at the bottom of this list, where even someone who isn't from the US can feel superior to her because he's white, and the social status is often determined by proximity to whiteness above all else. And I say this knowing that this specific phenomenon, it can be uniquely observed in Hispanic communities, but that's something that I won't get into too much in this video, just throwing that out there. There's also a symbolic reference to dandelions, where Piccola says that they look pretty, although if you were to see a field of dandelions, you would only associate it with being ridden with weeds. Despite the vibrant yellow color, they cannot be viewed as beautiful. Now we get to the winter section of this book, and in the winter, it mostly follows Claudia and Frida. In the winter, a new girl starts at their school by the name of Moren Peel, who is notably a light-skinned Black girl. She garners the attention of everyone around her, and Claudia and Frida specifically notice that both the Black and the white kids, they pay a lot of attention to her and almost seem to love her. Claudia and Frida are initially very annoyed by her and the attention she gets and try to put her down, although no one seems to agree with them and their perceptions of that Moren is not someone to be gawked at. They specifically mention that Moren sees herself as very cute, and in the novel it says, "If she was cute, and if anything could be believed she was, then we were not. And what did that mean? We were lesser, nicer, brighter, but still lesser. What was the secret? What did we lack? Why was it important?" Moren Peel was not the enemy and not worthy of such intense hatred. The thing to fear was the thing that made her beautiful, and not us. One day, Moren walks home with them and they find Piccola on the playground surrounded by a group of boys that are tormenting her. They're specifically chanting that Piccola's father sleeps naked, and there's a specific line in the book that I will read aloud now. They had extemporized a verse made up of 2 insults about matters over which the victim had no control: the color of her skin and speculations on the sleeping habits of an adult. That they themselves were Black or that their own father had similarly relaxed habits was irrelevant. It was their contempt for their own Blackness that gave the first insult its teeth. They seemed to have taken all of their smoothly cultivated ignorance, their exquisitely learned self-hatred, their elaborately designed hopelessness, and sucked it all up into a fiery cone of scorn. This line is important to note as it speaks to the greater theme about how beauty standards and social norms are taught to children who are essentially parroting what they hear from adults. These boys are poking fun at Piccola, but they don't really understand why it is what they're saying is meant to hurt her, and simultaneously ignoring their own similarities to her. Moren and the girls come to her aid and take her out for some ice cream, but Moren brings up what the boys were saying in the park and asks Piccola if it's true. Claudia comes to her defense and the girls start fighting, where eventually they part ways. When the girls go back home, they see Mr. Henry, a new tenant that was invited to live in their house by their mother. He gives them a quarter to go back and go for some ice cream, but when they return back home, they see that he is visited by 3 women, notably China, Poland, and a woman that they call Miss Maginot Line. The Maginot Line is a reference to a defensive fortification built in France to hold off German invasion, although it's not necessarily what Claudia is referring to when she calls her that. So I will include a citation as well because I found this explanation that was very well said on the internet, so let me just read it. In regard to the novel, Claudia's naming Marie the Maginot Line refers to the line that her mother does not want her to cross, a line where she would get introduced to sex and intimacy, thus becoming ruined. It's important to note that early in the novel, Piccola mentions that these three women live above their family. She visits them frequently and enjoys their company, which could greater signify the dirtiness of Piccola and the Breedloves. And this is the first instance that Mr. Henry is not necessarily a respectable man as he presents himself to be. Junior is another character we meet, a little boy that goes to school with Piccola and lives right next to the playground. He is also another light-skinned boy in this story and speaks to the superiority that is associated with a proximity to whiteness. His section initially focuses on his mother and how the women from her hometown have an inherent superiority to them. Much like Pauline, she falls into a similar fate, marrying a husband that she does not love and creating a family, tending their home with an almost animalistic instinct. And I say animalistic in the sense that it's something that's hardwired into her brain. It is something she does not by choice, but because of a sense of duty that has been passed on to her, something that's hardwired into her brain, and something that she doesn't question about why she has to do it. This section also examines the way in which Black women's sexual pleasure is stigmatized. Anything related to sexuality is seen as dirty, and any woman who engages in such activities, no matter the circumstance, is ruined. Junior's mother's story is not one that we linger on, instead seen as yet another victim in the cycle of violence against Black women. Instead, we focus on her relationship with her cat, the only thing she loves and cares for, even above her own son. We also see how Junior's mother is very aware of the certain things that separate her from other Black women in the community. She is keenly aware of certain traits that are associated with Black women and does everything in her ability to kind of dampen them. She calls this the funk, and in the book she says, "Wherever it erupts, this funk, they wipe it away. The laugh that is a little too loud, the enunciation a little too round, the gesture a little too generous. They hold their behind in for fear of a sway too free. When they wear lipstick, they never cover the entire mouth for fear of lips too thick, and they worry about the edges of their hair." Junior picks up immediately that his mother does not necessarily hold any love for him. She even says, as long as his needs were physical, she could meet them. Comfort and satiety. He was always brushed, bathed, oiled, and shod. Geraldine did not talk to him, cooed to him, or indulge him in kissing bouts. Through Junior, we see a glimpse into a male perspective that is not necessarily present in the earlier parts of this book. Junior is incredibly violent with the cat and abuses it, although he can't do much without his mother intervening. Junior's life is heavily influenced by his mother, where she controls who he can play with. She takes extreme measures to make sure that he does not appear ashy. Anything that can separate him from his Blackness, she takes every measure to do so. She makes him believe that he is clean and respectable for his whiteness, while the Black children are dirty and animalistic. She doesn't allow him to play with the other Black boys, although Junior expresses a desire to do so. We also see him direct his anger at the little girls. He says he enjoys pushing them and seeing when their bloomers come up, although he doesn't try anything with the Black girls that he goes to school with because they travel in packs and they're aggressive. When he sees Piccola alone at the playground, he immediately jumps at the opportunity. Junior invites her into his house, where he immediately picks up his mother's cat and throws it at Piccola's face. It scratches her, trying to find balance, and he locks her in the room, forcing her to cry. Piccola is initially afraid of the cat, but once it starts brushing against her legs, she sees that it's not necessarily aggressive, and she goes down to pet it. Junior notices that Piccola is not screaming anymore. He goes into the room and sees that they're having an enjoyable moment together. He suddenly becomes very angry. He picks up the cat and swings it around his head before throwing it into the radiator and killing it. Junior's mother comes home just in time to see what he's done, but he blames Piccola. Geraldine comes home and immediately directs all of her anger towards Piccola and kicks her out of the house. Junior's section is important because we see how he's been victimized as well. He's held to certain standards because of his proximity to whiteness, and yet, despite having a sense of superiority, he and Piccola are both the same. They're both very lonely children without parents who genuinely love them. His behaviors and actions, although destructive and harmful, are products of his environment, showing how the cycle of violence is perpetuated from parent to child and thus child to child. Now we are on the spring section of this novel. When the spring begins, Claudia finds out that Mr. Henry has touched Frida inappropriately. Frida went to tell her parents, and her mother and father immediately came back to the house and tried to chase him away. A few of the neighbors even joined in, and they gave Mr. McTeer a gun, and he shot at Mr. Henry as he was running away. Frida is concerned because one of the neighbors was worried that she might be ruined. Again, this is a word that comes up very frequently in this story, and the way that they interpreted ruined was how it was associated with the Maginot Line. Because the Maginot Line, aka Marie, is described as being fat, they think that that's what ruined means. They think the only way that they can stop to become ruined is to drink whiskey like Poland and China. The other women that are associated with the Maginot Line, but in this instance, they're skinny. The girls go to Piccola's house because they believe that since her father is a drinker, that she would be the only one to have whiskey. When they get there, Piccola is not there. Instead, they are met with Miss Maginot Line. She tells them that they can wait on her porch for Piccola to come back home, but the girls say no, that they're not allowed because she is ruined. In response, she throws a root beer bottle at their feet and laughs, causing them to run away. The girls run all the way down to the lake, to the home where Piccola's mother works. When they get there, Piccola is surprised to see them, but greets them with a smile, which Claudia notes that makes her look very pretty. When they walk inside to wait for her mother to bring the wash, Piccola notices a freshly baked berry pie on the counter. When she goes to touch it, she ends up burning herself and knocking over the pie. A little white girl comes out from one of the rooms and calls for someone named Polly, aka Pauline. Claudia specifically takes note of this, as even Piccola doesn't call her mother Polly, she calls her Mrs. Breedlove. So for this white girl who has no relation to Mrs. Breedlove to have such an affectionate nickname for her is something that we should pay attention to. When Mrs. Breedlove comes back, she quickly and swiftly reprimands Piccola, knocking her to the ground and beating her before going to comfort the child. The reader's eye lingers on Polly as the girls leave the house, and she comforts the little girl with a sweetness that we previously didn't know her to have. We could hear Mrs. Breedlove hushing and soothing the tears of the little pink and yellow girl. "Who were they, Polly?" "Don't worry none, baby. You gonna make another pie?" "Course I will." "Who were they, Polly?" "Hush, don't worry none," she whispered, and the honey in her words complemented the sundown spilling on the lake. This is a kindness and a tenderness that we don't see Mrs. Breedlove extend to even her own children, especially not to Piccola. This is one of the many instances in which we meet one of the people that have failed Piccola. In the author's note, Toni Morrison mentions that she intentionally gives the reader a holistic view of these characters. It gives us perspective and forces us to see them entirely versus just villains. It's easy to condemn someone when they are just completely and utterly evil, but when we see all sides of them, it's much harder to do so. And more importantly, it shows us how Piccola's story is only one link in an incredibly long chain of violence. Pauline is a victim of circumstance. Much like Piccola, she also experienced hardship growing up. As one of many siblings, she was forced to keep house and didn't have much opportunity for herself until she met Charlie. It's bittersweet how their relationship is described, initially as one filled with love and hope until they moved to Ohio. Pauline starts to feel inadequate in her surroundings. She notes that in the South, there were not as many white people around, but in the North, it's completely different. The other Black women in the community would make fun of her accent, specifically how she would say children instead of children. She was made to feel lesser than them, and coupled with her feeling isolated and away from her family and comfort, she tries desperately to fit in. Charlie spends less and less time with her, eventually becoming a very heavy drinker. It forces her to get a job working in a white woman's house. One day, Charlie comes to the house where Pauline is working and tries to drag her away, which ends up scaring her boss very badly. Pauline's boss refuses to give her her paycheck or her job back until she leaves Charlie, and Mrs. Breedlove notes, "How are you going to answer a woman like that, who don't know what good a man is, and say out of one side of her mouth she's thinking of your future, but won't give you your own money so you can buy you something besides bologna to eat?" For Pauline, the idea of leaving an abusive marriage is not a luxury that a Black woman can have. To her, it's a nonsensical idea that only exists in the fantasy land of white people. Because when you're perceivably at the top of the societal food chain and you have all your basic needs met, you can worry about things like that, about marrying for love or wanting more than just a marriage of convenience. For Pauline and other Black women, they don't have these luxuries. These aren't the kinds of things that they think of when they're marrying. It's further emphasized by the fact that this woman will not give Pauline her final paycheck, even though she needs it to pay for gas in their home. The white woman cannot conceptualize that Pauline doesn't have all her basic needs met, and thus can't think about what she wants out of a marriage. Eventually, Pauline gets pregnant with Sam and eventually Piccola, although despite Charlie's renewed kindness towards her, she's reminded of her initial frustration with being so isolated. While she is pregnant with Piccola, she mentions that she was initially very loving towards her, even talking to her while she was still in utero. Pauline also started going to the movies and even dressed up like the movie stars she saw on screen, although she's discouraged from continuing on because, as she says in the book, I forgot to mention, a lot of Pauline's associations with her own beauty are symbolized when she loses teeth. So in this specific section, she's at the movie theaters and she bites into a piece of candy and she loses a tooth. I was sitting back in my seat and I'd taken a big bite of that candy and it pulled a tooth right out of my mouth. I could have cried. I had good teeth, not a rotten one in my head. I don't believe I ever did get over that. There I was, 5 months pregnant, trying to look like Jean Harlow, and a front tooth gone. Everything went then. Looked like I just didn't care no more after that. I let my hair go back, plaited it up, and settled down to just being ugly. When she gives birth to Piccola, she decides to go to the hospital, where a doctor tells his students that Black women are like animals and don't feel pain when they give birth. This mentality and this medical bias is still the norm even to this day. The implication that Black women do not feel pain leads to medical neglect, mistreatment, and higher mortality rates for both pregnant women and their children. There is a very heavy disparity in the way white and Black women are treated during childbirth, where the white woman in the room with Pauline is comforted and pitied for her pain, and she is compared to an animal. Pauline says that after hearing this, she purposely moaned and groaned to show them that giving birth was not something easy and that she can feel pain too. The pains wasn't as bad as I let on, but I had to let them people know having a baby was more than a bowel movement. I hurt just like them white women who say they don't have no pain just because they don't cry, because she can't say it. They think it ain't there. After Piccola is born, the breedlove slowly descend into the dysfunction we know them as today. Although for Pauline, she finds refuge in the white family she currently works for. It is there where she shows them her kindness and love and feels proud. The place where she isn't Mrs. Breedlove, but Polly. Now we move on to Charlie Breedlove, one extreme case on the spectrum of violence perpetuated against Piccola. Charlie was abandoned by his father before he was born, and his mother left him for dead on the side of the road. He was taken in by a great aunt who eventually dies during his lifetime. Charlie never knew any sort of stability or paternal love and finds comfort in the ways that the people who cared for Aunt Jimmy, his great aunt, take care of him after she passes. During this time, Charlie sneaks off with another girl, Darlene, and has sex with her in the grass. This is where it gets incredibly heavy, so if you want to skip this part, I will include a timestamp where it is safe to come back. Although going forward from this point, I will be referring to this moment in time, although here is where I will get into the most detail. So again, feel free to skip if you need to. Two white men stumble on them and tell him to keep going and to make it good. Darlene feels deep and genuine fear, but Charlie experiences pure and utter humiliation. Charlie does not point any anger towards the white men that come upon them in this situation. Instead, he focuses it on Darlene. Hello, I'm wearing a different outfit because it is a new day, but I am continuing with my analysis and review of the Bluest Eye. The humiliation he feels is not necessarily because of being seen in this position, but because he's supposed to be the big, strong man. This is also alluded to with the chapter title for this section, as it's a fragment of the little main story that we're told at the very beginning. So I'm showing a chunk here. I don't know if you can see that very well, but this is the start to Charlie section where it says, "See, father, he is big and strong. Father, will you play with Jane? Father is smiling. Smile, father, smile, smile." As a man, he should be a protector, but the existence of women is both the object to be protected and the physical embodiment of men's failures to protect them. In this instance, he failed to protect Darlene, and thus her existence is proof of his impotence and inadequacies and shortcomings as a man, which again goes back to his perceived role as a man in society, the things that he believes he needs to be, which in my humble opinion is because I believe in our society, manhood is often defined by what it means to to be a woman, in the sense that anything that a woman is, a man should be the opposite of. If women are perceived as delicate, then men should be tough. If women are perceived to be naive, then men should be cunning and smart. Being a man is to be the opposite of a woman, but if you take away the woman in this situation, then what makes the man? Again, these are all ideas and topics that have been consistently perpetuated in our society because of the patriarchy. But regardless, Charlie holds a lot of painful memories and feelings that are connected back to this moment in his life. Charlie runs away shortly after this incident after he considers the fact that Darlene might be pregnant after this incident. He decides that he needs to find his father, ironically doing the exact same thing that his father did to him by abandoning his mother, as he's perceivedly doing to Darlene. He travels to Macon, Georgia, where he finally meets his father, Samson Fuller. Although Samson Fuller is not the father that Charlie hoped he would find. Samson hardly gives him a second glance, and Charlie is left feeling hopeless. He washes himself in a river and becomes a free man, deciding to do whatever he wants and follow any whim that crosses his mind. Charlie eventually meets Pauline and has his 2 children, although it becomes very evident that he hasn't the slightest clue about what it means to be a father. He's completely unaware of the emotional needs of his children and his wife, and mainly conducts his home based on what he's feeling. Then comes the moment that we've been hearing about throughout this story, the moments that is alluded to at the very beginning, and the moment that we all knew was coming, but was hoping it wouldn't, which I think is very purposeful on Toni Morrison's part. She tells us immediately at the beginning of the story that this happens, but it's never necessarily expanded upon until this point in time in the book. So it almost gives the reader the illusion that maybe it won't happen. It gives you the hope that maybe it won't happen to Piccola. Maybe she can be saved. But as we know, that's not what happens. Again, this part, incredibly, incredibly heavy. So please skip if you need to. Piccola Breedlove is washing dishes at the sink. Charlie is drunk and stumbles in to see her. Piccola scratches her leg with the back of her foot, an action that Pauline was doing when Charlie first met her and fell in love with her. His memories of Pauline and the love he had for her flood his mind and confuse his perceptions of the past and the present. He grabs Piccola and rapes her, his love eventually turning to hate and disgust as he remembers the moment with Darlene in the grass. He leaves Piccola, who is passed out on the ground, and covers her with a quilt. A pitiful act of kindness. This scene is painful, it's heartbreaking, and it's hard to read. We as the reader know that it will happen, although there is a part of us that wishes it won't. And make no mistake, this does not happen just because Charlie is drunk and not thinking clearly. Toni Morrison's inclusion of his backstory is not to garner sympathy or to provide excuses for what Charlie did, because there is never an excuse for what he did or what any man might do to a young girl. But she includes it simply, and as with the other characters, so that we as the readers can't simply dismiss this as something that can only happen in a story. What happens to Piccola Breedlove is the worst possible scenario, but not an impossible one, and forcing the reader to see every part of the character, the good and the bad, and every single part of Charlie Breedlove forces us to come to this realization. Again, it's easy to dismiss this as just some villainous act, something so heinous that it can only happen in the pages of a book, but that's not true. The final character we meet in The Bluest Eye is Elijah Micah Whitcomb, aka Soaphead Church, who, despite being black, explains that his entire family line has devoted themselves to preserving the whiteness of their bloodline. This is also paralleled by his obsession with cleanliness, enforcing the idea that whiteness and cleanliness is to be desired, while blackness is inherently dirty. He's also a scam artist that claims he has a connection with God and can grant people's wishes. Piccola comes to his house hoping that he can give her blue eyes. He feels sorry for her, and for the first time in his life, remorseful that he can't actually grant wishes. He wants so desperately to give her the blue eyes that she wants, and takes advantage of her hopes and wishes to help carry out something that he's been wanting to do as well. He gets her to do his dirty work in the exchange of a promise of blue eyes. He gives Piccola a piece of poisoned meat to give to his neighbor's dog, which he thinks is mangy and gross. Piccola does so in order to get the blue eyes. Soaphead then writes a letter to God after Piccola leaves his home, condemning God for not making Piccola beautiful and forcing her to live her life as ugly. He notably does not condemn society for putting such heavy value in eurocentric features as a standard of beauty, but talks about Piccola's ugliness, aka her black features, as if it were an unchangeable fact. We are now in the summer season, where we suddenly go back to Claudia and Frida's perspective as they start hearing people gossip in their neighborhood about Piccola and the Breedloves. Now they know that she's pregnant, and the reader sees how horridly these people speak about Piccola. These people that think it is their right to do so just because she is ugly. One of the women even says that Piccola shares some of the blame for what happened to her. And I'm going to read the excerpt from the book. What you reckon make him do a thing like that? Beats me. Just nasty. Well, they ought to take her out of school. Ought to. She carries some of the blame. Oh, come on. She ain't but 12 or so. Yeah, but you never know. How come she didn't fight him? Maybe she did. Well, it probably won't live. They say the way her mama beat her, she lucky to be alive herself. She lucky if it don't live. Bound to be the ugliest thing walking. Again, the other person in that conversation has to remind her that Piccola is only 12 years old. I think that this was included because this idea of Black girls aging differently than white girls is an idea that we see in our own society. The way that Black girls develop during puberty is often the focus of hypersexualization in our society. It contributes to the dehumanization of Black girls and women. They are not granted the same grace period of childhood innocence as little white girls and are viewed as inherently less innocent. Denying Black girls of childhood is another way that society denies them protection, as most people recognize that all children should be protected at all costs. And refusing to acknowledge Piccola as an innocent child is even more heinous because it comes from another Black woman in her community, further showing how these ideas and prejudices are not only perpetuated by white people, but by society as a whole. I think that there is a conversation to be had about the grace that we allow other people during their times of development versus how we approach Black girls and Black women. Claudia and Frida find out that Piccola is pregnant and decide that they will pray for the baby to live. Piccola's baby is the antithesis of the white baby dolls that Claudia mentions at the beginning of the story, and she decides that someone should want the baby to live, since everyone else thinks it would be good if it died. They decide that they will bury their money near Piccola's house and plant their marigold seeds in their yard, promising God that they will be good for a whole month. They believe that if the marigolds start to sprout, that it is a sign that everything will be okay. As was bound to happen, the marigolds did not bloom that year, and Piccola's baby did not survive. The end of the story is Piccola's final descent into madness. She has a conversation with an imaginary friend about her blue eyes. Piccola believes that she has the most beautiful blue eyes, and that everyone is so jealous that they don't want to be near her, when in reality, it's because of the stigma of being seen with her. In this section, we learn that Charlie abused Piccola once more, but that she didn't tell her mother about it because the first time, Pauline blamed Piccola for the incident and beat her very badly. A notably different reaction to how Frida's parents reacted when Mr. Henry had touched Frida inappropriately. Piccola suddenly becomes afraid that she doesn't have the bluest eyes and goes into a panicked frenzy that she can't be beautiful if she doesn't have the bluest eye. A quote from the book. We tried to see her without looking at her, and never went near. Not because she was absurd or repulsive, or because we were frightened, but because we had failed her. All of our waste, which we dumped on her and which she absorbed, and all of our beauty, which was hers first and which she gave to us, all of us, all who knew her, felt so wholesome after we cleaned ourselves on her. We were so beautiful when we stood astride her ugliness. The final paragraph of The Bluest Eye is Claudia thinking about how she might have planted the marigold seeds too deep, or something that she must have done to make sure that the marigolds did not bloom. And now when I see her searching the garbage for what? The thing we assassinated, I talk about how I did not plant the seeds too deeply, how it was the fault of the earth, the land of our town. I even think now that the land of the entire country was hostile to marigolds that year. This soil is bad for certain kinds of flowers. Certain seeds it will not nurture. Certain fruit it will not bear. And when the land kills of its own volition, we acquiesce and say the victim had no right to live. We are wrong, of course, but it doesn't matter. It's too late. At least on the edge of my town, among the garbage and the sunflowers of my town, it's much too late. And that's the end of the book. I will now cover some themes that I thought was important to bring up, and things that constantly came back to me as I read and reread this book, because I did read it a second time. The use of seasons is an incredibly impactful story device, and one that I couldn't put into words until, funny enough, I watched an analysis video of The Last of Us, a video game that uses a similar story device. The winter is a season of scarcity and hardship, and the place where Piccola faces Junior and Moren. But the worst of her experiences comes in spring, a season that is supposed to be hopeful, ironically a season of change, and the season where Piccola's life changes forever. There's a lot of hardship that happens to Piccola in the winter, and it almost gives the reader the illusion that this is the worst of what's going to happen to Piccola, even though we know that it's not. The beginning of the book, the primer, as I've learned, is what that is. Essentially, it's a device that was used to help children learn to read and pronunciate. That's that little chunk at the beginning of the book. It's called a primer. It's with Dick and Jane is used as a parallel to the story. It exemplifies the American dream, the nuclear family, white picket fence, mother and father, children, friends. It's juxtaposed with Piccola's story and how that primer is everything that she lacks. It further adds to this fallacy that many non-white people hold onto, when in reality, the American dream, or what we perceive it to be, is incredibly and inherently unattainable, not by our own doing or our own lacks, but rather the systems in place that prevent us from getting there. I think it's also important to note that the people in this story that fail Piccola all fall on very different sides of the spectrum of violence, from absolutely vile to passive contempt. Even Claudia and Frida, who care about Piccola and show her much kindness throughout this book, do not reach out to her and don't try to associate with her, as I mentioned in that quote, because even they still fear the social stigma of being seen with her. And most importantly, all these peoples are members of the Black community, further showing how the Eurocentric beauty standards and white superiority is an idea that is perpetuated by all members of the community and needs to be addressed internally as well as externally. The Bluest Eye is not meant to be just a story of pity. We are not meant to say, poor Piccola, and I hope that Piccola is doing all right, but rather question where we went wrong and how we can prevent it. How can we protect the Claudias, the Fridas, and the Piccolas of the world, the little Black girls that pray for blue eyes so that they can too be beautiful? There are so many ways that we as a society fail Black women, and we must recognize the ways that we do. Even those that don't want to acknowledge the role they play, we all have a part to play in the continued oppression and subjugation of Black women. So the question we're left with now is, what do we do about it? How can we as individuals and a collective make a better effort to do right by Black women? This is a question that I can only try to answer as a fellow woman of color, while acknowledging that I could not even begin to imagine what these women go through during the span of their lifetimes. I believe that first and foremost, we must listen, hear their stories, and give them space to speak, believe victims, and learn about the ways that we can better advocate for infrastructure that protects Black women against harassment, abuse, and violence. And most importantly, before we can protect Black women, we must protect Black girls. Tell them they are beautiful, not for what they wear or how they look, but who they are. Nurture them and their growth. Give them Black baby dolls and tell them how pretty they are. Tell them that even if there's someone out there that won't look out for them, that there is safety and love in our arms and our hearts. I'm like a really powerful writer, I guess. Holy shit, because I'm crying right now. The story of Piccola Breedlove is one of inevitability. Once you open the book, Piccola's fate is sealed. And even though her story is inevitable, it's not unavoidable. Right now, there are millions of little Black girls that don't know how the world can hurt them. They don't know its cruelties. They don't know that there are people out there that won't look out for them. They haven't learned that some people will force them to hate the things that make them who they are. And right now, we have the ability to change it. We have the unique chance to make sure that they never learn that. These little girls don't know how the world can hurt them. And right now we have the ability to change it before it can. My voice is cracking very heavily. I feel very passionately about this. Thank you so much for watching. That was my review, analysis, synopsis, everything of The Bluest Eye. I absolutely love this book, and I think it's incredibly important that so many people read it, even though it's not necessarily the most famous work by Toni Morrison. I know a lot more people recognize her from Sula, Song of Solomon, Beloved, things of that nature, but her book, The Bluest Eye, is incredibly influential. And it's an incredibly quick read, so read it, know it, understand it. I definitely recommend reading it twice. The first time you just need to hear it. The second time is when you can actually listen. Of course, I will give this book like 100 out of 100. It's so good. It's so influential. I'm very emotional right now, but it was really good. This was The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. I loved it. And I sincerely hope that more people pick up this book. I did format this a little bit more informationally just because I hoped that this book would get recommended more for reading curriculums, and that hopefully, I don't know, I hope that some people might use this as a resource. Otherwise, I think that's it. I need to get a tissue and compose myself a little bit. The next book, let me grab that. The next book on my reading list is Ace of Spades by Farida Abike-Iyimide. And spoiler alert, I actually already finished it and already read it. So I'm actually going to record the review right now. Reading these two books back to back was a choice, has led to some of my own destruction. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thank you for listening. Anyway, that's it.